Good afternoon, people of Messiah. We are once again gathered together in our own homes, our own places. Very similar to what was done in Jesus' day with house churches, maybe a few less people, but we are still a community of faith. We are still the people of God, and we are still gathered together to worship for this Maundy Thursday service today. And if you all were able to see the announcement on Facebook, hopefully you are able to do this service at 6:30 p.m. as one community, all at the same time. The gospel reading comes later in this service, but I am still going to do it now since it has to do with my sermon. So I'm going to read to you from the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verses 1 through 17 and 31b to 35. Now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me. And as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." I imagine it was a strange day, that day that the disciples were gathered with Jesus. Things were starting to run amok. It was crazy and it was dangerous. People were getting angry with Jesus. And they turned to what they knew. They turned to their piety. They turned to what they turned to every year at that time. They gathered for the Passover meal. They were gathered together in one room. You see this picture here behind me, which was a gift from one of my previous congregations, showing that Passover meal. Jesus together with his friends. They went to what they knew. They knew their religion. They knew what gave them comfort. And they gathered together and did that. We are in uncertain times now because of this pandemic. Not just that, but also because of regular life things that are still happening. On Palm Sunday, we talked about living under that hope, living right under, nestling in, knowing what's going to happen, but also knowing the promise that comes into it. And we can return to that promise again and again. The disciples were scared, and they would get more scared. But Jesus showed them what to do with what they were feeling, something that surprised them. He took on the role of a servant. He tied a towel around his waist and did the servant's job of washing each one of their feet and said, "This is what love looks like. This is what I want you to do in this time. There's uncertainty. There might even be fear. But this is what love looks like. Getting down on your hands and knees and caring for someone else in a most basic way. This is love." Nadia Bolz-Weber in her sermon for today talks about Jesus' feet having been washed already. 5 days earlier, Jesus was with his friends, Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Didn't say they were disciples, it said they were his friends. And what does Mary do? But wash Jesus' feet with perfume. We don't know how Jesus dealt with that, as Nadia so rightly points out. But we know he does something very similar for the disciples on this day, Maundy Thursday, which seems like an insane name. I never understood it. I probably called it Monday Thursday when I was a kid because I didn't know any different. And that didn't make sense to me either. Maundy comes from the Latin word for command. And it references Jesus' command to love one another as I have first loved you. When we are in these days where there's uncertainty and where there's fear, where we are scared, maybe because of the coronavirus, but maybe because of other things, other hard life things that are still happening. A medical diagnosis, a broken relationship, even death. There are still hard things. And so as we experience the emotions of the day, we can remember what Jesus told us love looks like. He got down on his hands and knees. He grabbed a bowl of water and washed feet. He humbled himself. And so we figure out ways now to humble ourselves, to figure out how to sit with people in pain, to figure out how to care for someone else and address their most basic needs when we can't go and stand next to them, can't give them a hug. And I have heard stories of people doing that wonderfully. Some, it's putting hearts in windows or a cross or painting them. For some, it's picking up garbage. For some, it's getting groceries and delivering them. For some, it's calling on the phone. For some, it's writing a letter or a card. It's checking in, because we live under this hope that even though there is hard stuff, there is Jesus and there is God, and their promise is still as sure today in the midst of all the ick that happens. Still as sure as every other day it's been sure. Jesus still comes and kneels at our feet, washes them, and sends us to do the same, whether it be sending us to our living room or our front yard or even to the grocery store. We are a sent people. Thanks be to God. Amen.